Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the organizers of this wonderful event and those who gave me this possibility to share with you the ideas on this very important topic, majority and the opposition, as the most important ingredients of functional democracy. On one hand, it is not easy to move from the topic we discussed earlier this morning, which occupies our minds, but probably balanced democracy is the solution of these issues we discussed yesterday and today. Therefore, probably this is quite appropriate topic which would conclude our conference. At the same time, I want to mention that my job became much easier when I saw this very interesting brochure prepared by the organizers on the topic, where all the standards and issues concerning the majority opposition cooperation or competition is concerned. Therefore, I would rather stress on the experience which I can share with you and which comes from my country, Georgia. And Georgia is offering quite wide range of possibilities of case studies because we experienced change of power by bloody revolution in early 90s. Then we managed to change the power through peaceful revolution. And just recently, about 2 years ago, we finally achieved kind of standards of democracy and the government was changed through peaceful elections. However, this process of democratization in my country is not unique. And when we are talking about the majority and the opposition, we need to take into account the great difference among the member countries on this issue. And if we look across Europe, across the member countries of the Council of Europe, we will see that the very notion of majority and the opposition differs significantly. What is the opposition? Well, opposition is something like leader of Her Majesty's most loyal opposition with appropriate privileges and institutional settings and the role in the functioning of the parliamentary democracy. On the other hand, you will find different definition of the opposition, which are the enemies of the state, which needs to be prosecuted, and Bolsheviks are running after everybody who have different opinion. And this is the reality in European space as well. Same could be said about the majority, because on one hand, you will have majority composed by several political parties who gave to their voters very concrete promises, and their majority alliance in the parliament or in the government is based on very clearly articulated coalition agreement, and that's what the majority works for. On the other hand, you will see majorities which are composed by one man, authoritarian leaders who are majority because they are the greats. So all these realities across the European space suggests us that the topic, majority, opposition, and the very basic fundamental issues of democracy needs to be addressed much more carefully. I'll try to stress on 3 different dimensions of the problem, the balance between majority and the opposition: international, internal, and kind of human dimension. I believe nobody questions at the moment whether opposition is needed or not needed for democracy. But when we look across the countries, we find some common problems, why this balance is not maintained always. First of all, it seems that it is impossible to strike the balance between the majority and the opposition in a given society if there is no balance maintained between the poor and rich, men and women, black and white, urban and rural, and so on. That is, if the universal human rights, political rights, and the very basic principles of modern world, which is equality, which is tolerance, is not observed, then it is, of course, very difficult to think about achieving the standards when political forces are competing to each other in a free and fair competition. This is problem which is very closely related to another issue, namely monopoly on the truth. For some years, I thought that this disease was our disease of former communist countries and former Soviet societies, where monopoly on truth held by Communist Party was officially recognized, constitutionally recognized principle. However, I am discovering that this is not only our problem. And for example, EPP monopoly of truth is not any better than communist monopoly on truth, or any other party monopoly on truth. Is it internal or international? Unfortunately, we are observing this kind of situations when followers of different ideologies are trying to hold the monopoly on truth. In such case, of course, there is very few steps towards declaring the opposition as the problem, not solution. Declaring opposition as necessary evil rather than necessary component of democracy. And from this concept, it is very often difficult to realize what we mean when we are talking about the opposition. Is it best possible critique or best possible substitution or alternative to the current government? For achieving this standard, for treating the opposition on that level, we need to address the issue of the monopoly on truth and the state capture, which is quite common in our region, when the distinction between the party lines and political institutions and state institutions is very difficult to observe. In such case, of course, talking about free political competition becomes quite problematic. Another observation is that smaller the government, smaller the size of power, smaller the amount of resources which is controlled directly by the governments, better the balance between the opposition and the majority. Because in such case, there are other players in the society which are very important players which make influence on the representatives of both sides, opposition and majority, in order to maintain this balance. There are international dimensions of the issue, which again, I can bring some examples from our own experience. Because when we are talking about majority and minority, we need to answer the question where they come from. They come from the elections. So then the question is, what kind of elections? Free and fair elections. Is this standard achieved across Europe? Are these principles and standards observed in all member states of the Council of Europe? Unfortunately, no. Therefore, this issue should be realized in the dynamics. The fact that at the moment in a given parliament, certain number of people compose majority and the others opposition, does not mean that they necessarily reflect adequately the mood of the people. And if there is no adequate reflection of the mood of the people in the elected bodies, then, of course, maintaining balance between the opposition and the majority and achieving the right standards of their interaction is very difficult. At the same time, we see that elections are becoming or are already international issues, not internal issues, when the standards are concerned. We developed kind of joke in Georgia for many years that international observers were coming to Georgia, including Council of Europe observers, OSCE observers, and many other observers, in order to observe our elections with widely closed eyes. The understanding was that, yeah, they came in order to not to see something. And if such approach continues, and if majorities are born through such elections, then we cannot think about democracy or striking balance between the opposition and majority, because any kind of state capture will lead to controversies in internal politics. This issue must be addressed and should be viewed in another dimension, which is international dimension as well. Unfortunately, the fact that internal politics, especially in smaller countries, are affected by international politics in a great deal is affecting this issue as well. Because the balance or relationship between the political forces in the smaller countries, including Georgia or new democracies, is not internal issue only. Therefore, we saw many times when wanted person who was regarded to be appropriate leader for our country was forgiven election fraud, was forgiven violence against opposition, was forgiven deprivation of basic political rights, and that led to huge problems in our country. Therefore, it is important to address this issue on the level of international politics. I am representative of the political party, Republican Party of Georgia, which is a liberal party. And although the party was founded about 35 years ago during communist period as a secret organization, the party flourished only after we started our cooperation with our sister parties in Europe. And I understand how important it is to maintain such contacts between the political groups. But I also realized how important it is to maintain the standards and to apply standards of democracy to each other, and not to become too much bounded by some political interests on the international level. And the last thing which I would raise during this discussion is the human dimension. How to achieve that majority and opposition are cooperating and they are both contributing to the prosperity of given nation or given country. Both majority and the opposition, they consist of humans. And it is important to provide right leadership and to demonstrate right examples, how we behave, how we politicians behave. And in this regard, I believe today we are in this room, the people who should play the most important role in our societies. Because the job of speaker could be described by this line: achieving balance between the majority and minority, therefore promoting democracy in their countries. Therefore, I believe if we do our jobs on the appropriate level, we will contribute to solution of this problem, which appears to be a problem not only in my country, but in developed societies as well. Thank you.